In Jonestown, in Guinea, in South America, there was, we're told they all committed suicide, but there was also some foreign, there was like a senator visiting at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what it is, Jonestown it was actually in Guyana. It's an offshoot of a religious organization called the People's Temple, which was like a sort of quasi-communistic religious organization. And as you say, they moved to Guyana, and reportedly about 900 to 1,000 people committed mass suicide. And the leader of this temple was a bloke called Jim Jones, who was like a sort of, well, he was a cult leader essentially. He was sort of an evangelical preacher, but you know, they had very strange ideas. And the People's Temple actually began in Indiana in the 1950s, and then I think it moved to California in 65 because Indiana wasn't so keen on their inclusion of black people in this. And then it went to San Francisco in the 70s, and then I believe it moved to Guyana in 1974, and then the massacre was in 1978. I call it the massacre, as we'll come on to it. And the thing is, the suggestion is that this whole organization was an MK Ultra mind control program. Now, MK Ultra, as we discussed before, is the umbrella term that refers to the CIA and American mind control programs. Now, one of the offshoots of MK Ultra was a thing called MK Often, which is an admitted program where the CIA were creating and looking into the construction of cults, religious cults, and then seeing if this could be used to sort of, again, control large swathes of the population. Now, the clues, there's very many clues that People's Temple was CIA. Even before they moved to Guyana, like people like George Moscone, I apologize if who was the mayor of San Francisco, Rosalind Carter, they were writing records, letters of recommendation to people, basically getting loans for the People's Temple so that they could set themselves up in Guyana. Jerry Brown and Walter Mondale were also big fans. Harvey Milk, Senator Harvey Milk, he actually wrote to President Carter saying, ignore any bad things that you hear about the People's Temple, allow them tax-free status, blah, 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 and help them all out. The other thing about Rosalind Carter, who basically was a big sort of proponent of the People's Temple, she was also strangely a friend of serial killer John Wayne Gacy. There was a photo found in John Wayne Gacy's house of him smiling and laughing with Rosalind Carter, and it was signed to John Wayne Gacy, love from Rosalind Carter, but I digress. So anyway, the People's Temple is a cult, and it's a normal sort of cult. You take all the money, you isolate people, you're not allowed to see your family members and stuff like that. And so some people are starting to get a bit twitchy about this because there's certain custody battles that are going on with children and people, being coerced against their will. Now, it was a gentleman called Congressman Leo Ryan, and he'd heard about the various sort of reports of torture, imprisonment, forced sex, and stuff like this coming from Jonestown, coming from the People's Temple. And he was also a friend of, there was a defector from the temple, and he'd basically come back to America, and he'd been home for a very short period of time, and he'd been found murdered and mutilated. And so the suggestion was that maybe the temple had done this. So Congressman Leo Ryan went to Jonestown with a group of people to sort of check it out. And when he was there, he stayed for a few days, and after a few days he says, right, okay, I'm going to go now. And about 60 of these cult members decided that they were going to go with him. And as he's trying to leave, basically some bloke comes up and tries to stab Leo Ryan. And he's perfectly okay, but, that's slightly concerning. Anyway, they make it back to the airstrip where they've got a Cessna plane waiting, and a trailer rolls up, and a load of guys get out the back who were all described as having vacant stares, clear glassy eyes, and moving in a robotic fashion, and they begin shooting, and they kill Senator Ryan and several other members. Now, here we go. Unbeknownst to all of the people, there was a gentleman called Richard Dwyer who was part of the group. Now, he can be seen peeling off from the main group about 30 seconds before the shooters arrive. Richard Dwyer was an undercover CIA agent. After the shooting at the airstrip, Richard Dwyer disappeared for several hours, and nobody knows where he was. Now, the reports of the mass suicide were made a couple of hours later by a radio. Now, nobody's ever said who made this thing, but the only person with a working radio there was CIA agent Richard Dwyer. So this is where we get our concept that it was a mass suicide. Now, on the suicide tape, which was a recording that was made of the final moments, which is heavily, heavily edited to disguise gunshots, which I'll come on to in a minute, Jim Jones can be saying, get Dwyer out of here, get Dwyer, take him out of here now, before something bad happens to him. So we know that the CIA were in cahoots with them. The other thing is that George Blakey was a chief aide to Jim Jones. Now, he was also exposed to be a CIA agent, and he was actually in Guyana previously training Angolan mercenaries to fight another proxy war in South America. He was the person that actually purchased the land on which Jonestown was built. And again, that land was actually previously used by the CIA in an operation called Operation Shalom, which was training mercenaries to go and fight throughout South America. Now, again, the concept was that they all drank this poison Kool-Aid. It was poisoned with cyanide, and all these 900 or more cult members drank this and committed mass suicide. Now, again, this is absolutely not true. Now, at least 70% of the people there had fresh needle marks in their shoulders in a place where they couldn't reach it. The other thing is that cyanide causes massive convulsions, and basically all the bodies are lying in neat rows, which means that at the very least somebody moved the bodies afterwards. What's strange is that the vast majority of them appear to have numerous bullet wounds. Some of them have 2 bullets in the head, some of them are just riddled with bullets. The other thing is that the authorities basically left the bodies to decompose there for several days to disguise the cause of death. The body count slowly rose. I mean, essentially, at first it was reported as 200, then it was reported as 400, and then it was actually reported as 900. And this was given as a miscount by the Guyanese authorities. The truth of the matter would appear to be that basically the body count rose because as these cult members were trying to escape, they were actually rounded up and shot in the jungle by a group of 600 SAS Black Watch operation troops that just so happened to be on maneuvers in the surrounding area. And what they did was basically rounded up all these escapees, arranged their bodies, and left them there to die. Now, what this was a cleanup operation. They had to kill these 900 people because essentially Guyana and Jonestown was being used as like a mind control program. It was an isolated place. It's where you can get this concept of groupthink going on. There was torture, separation from the outside world. And there was also the heavy use of MK Ultra techniques and MK Ultra drugs. In one particular part, they found 11,000 doses of Thorazine. There were other things like scopolamine and various other Seconal and various other MK Ultra drugs that were also found in Jonestown. Now, what's really interesting as well is on the day that the news of the mass suicide in Guyana comes back to America, on the very same day, George Moscone and Harvey Milk, who had both been previous proponents of Jonestown, were both assassinated at the very same time. Almost as if we're trying to clear up all the sort of back connections to the thing. And there's a number of things that are very, very strange about Jonestown. I mean, there's a guy, I mean, I don't know if this is true, this is a speculative thing. There's a chap, a CIA agent, or claims to be a CIA agent, called Gunther Russbacher, who claims that Jonestown was part of an assassin program which is called Operation Clear Eyes. Now, I've not actually seen any sort of wider documentation supporting this, but his story seems very, very plausible. And what he was saying was basically the guys that tried to kill Leo Ryan. Leo Ryan went over there because he'd found out that it was a mind control program and wanted to see how nefarious it was. Essentially, he was tricked into going there because they wanted to assassinate him because he's making waves. And when he got there, something triggered these Clear Eyes assassins, and then once that started, it can't be stopped, and so they had to bring in the SAS to kill everybody. What is certainly true is that Jonestown was used, as well as a mind control hospital, it was used to smuggle drugs, and it was used to smuggle guns through the site. And it was also, again, it was still being used by the CIA to train mercenaries. What's really despicable is that that shows that this was an MK Ultra cult sort of process, is the inmates were taken from mental hospitals, secure mental hospitals, and children were taken from orphanages throughout the United States and placed into the Jonestown cult against their will. So where are they getting the sort of wherewithal to do this? This must have been from the CIA. A little sort of offshoot from the Jonestown thing is that serial killer Henry Lee Lucas actually, he claims in his sort of quasi-autobiography, The Hand of Death, to have delivered the cyanide to Guyana. Whether this is true or not, we do not know. But what he did talk about was CIA ran. He was apparently in a cult called the Hand of Death, and basically he talked about CIA ran quasi-satanic cults that were moving drugs and child prostitutes across the border in South America and also into Mexico and places like this. Again, sounds crazy, no? Well, it transpires that one of the sites that he said was absolutely correctly there. It was run by a bloke called Adolfo Constanzo, and it was, again, a military-industrial complex-ran drug operation that was employing Palo Mayombe, which is essentially a sort of Santeria type voodoo sacrifice where you take the souls, you sacrifice living people and make a broth out of their spines and brains and such like that to pray to certain gods, and then by this you can absorb their soul and take on certain aspects of it and basically become very, very powerful. And so again, this is very strange, and it certainly seems to lend its connection to the CIA making broader mind control cults. After the massacre, because it was a massacre, all these people were murdered by either members of the SAS or by proxy by the CIA. Now, what's interesting is after the massacre, George Blakey, who was a chief aide to Jonestown, who, remember, was a CIA agent, he moved to Trinidad very briefly, withdrew $5 million from a Credit Suisse bank account, and then relocated to Grenada, very possibly to the mental hospital at Grenada. Now, again, I'm not entirely sure if this is accurate, but the speculation is that the mental hospital in Grenada was being used by MKUltra and under the directorship of a gentleman called Dr. Bourne, and he'd been doing sort of primate-controlled experiments under MKUltra, and he was working at this hospital in Grenada. What has been suggested is that disguised in the invasion of Grenada, they actually bombed the mental hospital. Now, again, this is speculative, but it has been suggested as well that the mental hospital in Grenada was actually rebuilt with a grant that came directly from the American government for over $400 million, which is an awful lot of money. So the suggestion was that basically they were running mind control programs. They got to a point where they had to eliminate them. They murdered 180 of the patients in the bombing of Grenada, and then basically they went back in there and reset up the facility. And one final thing that is certainly very strange is that everybody that has seen the pictures of Jim Jones's corpse, and basically he was one of the last people to die, reportedly by a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. What's very, very strange about the body of Jim Jones that is presented in the media is that Jim Jones had tattoos all across his chest. Now, the body does not have tattoos across his chest, which is very strange. It certainly looks like Jim Jones, but the evidence does not suggest it. And as I said, because of the decomposed state of the bodies, very, very few, if any at all, were subjected to anything that would even come close to an autopsy. So, again, it is abound with mystery.